Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Bran. I thought at the end of my last live stream I've done all of the Stark children, but it turns out I haven't. I missed out on Bran. So today we are going to rectify that and we will look at Bran Stark. What I normally do is a bit of an overview to start with. I think with most of these Stark children, we do know the story that we've got so far, so I'm not about to go over all of his backstory. I think the thing I've said every single time, which is worth repeating here, is that we have to look at this character in the books through a different prism to what we look at on the TV show. When books start, Bran is 7. By the point we leave him, towards the end of A Dance with Dragons, then he is 9 years old, maybe. This is not, it's not even a teenager. This is still a child. And all he's been through, this preparation by Bloodraven, this driving him forward, experiencing, learning magic, everything that's happened is happening to a child, and he is not really ready for a lot of it. And George R. R. Martin has said that he struggles the most with the children's POVs, particularly Bran. Bran is he doesn't do a Rickon POV. Bran is the youngest child he does. And he finds it really hard because you have to get into the mindset of a child in interpreting what's going on around you. And I think when we are assessing what is happening with Bran, we have to go through that mindset as well. This is a 7, 8, 9-year-old child who is experiencing things that are way beyond anything, hopefully, that we have ever experienced. He's experienced the loss of his father, the loss of his mother, the loss of every kind of parental figure he's ever had. And he's being pushed forward into this world that he's not ready for, a world where, frankly, as we'll look at in a bit, he is being told that he is one of the most important people in this entire world. He's got things he needs to be doing. He's got powers he needs to be using. And he doesn't have, until he gets up to Bloodraven's cave, he doesn't have anyone to actually train him in these powers that he's got. He is undeniably powerful, but like most of the Stark children, there's no one there who's coaching him through this stuff. He gets up to Bloodraven's cave, and Bloodraven is like, okay, so this is how you skin change into something. And Bran's like, oh, yeah, well, I've already sort of done that. But like, he was just doing it instinctively. He didn't know what the rules were. He didn't know how he was supposed to do it. He didn't understand any of the morality behind it. And I think most readers, particularly when you come through a second or third read of the books, this is what is most unnerving about Bran, is that he is a child. He hasn't got this kind of guiding parental figure for most of his life. And they therefore don't teach him the moralities of what he is doing, because he is coming into huge power. And yet he is doing things that, just to take one random example, going into Hodor's mind and taking control of an adult over there. He is just going in, pushing Hodor out of the way. And when you read it, Bran is aware that Hodor's like whimpering in a corner of his mind somewhere, but Bran is just too strong for him, and he's just going in and doing stuff with Hodor's body without Hodor's permission. There's a morality issue going on there that is not addressed because he is just this 8-year-old kid. Nobody's ever stopped him and told him how you do this. Even when we get to the Faramir Sixskins prologue, where he talks through a whole load of these. These are the rules of what it is to be a skin changer. He's not a good person, Faramir Sixskins. He's really quite a nasty person, and yet even he understands that there's rules to this. So the fact that Bran has gone through all this time without that understanding, and then when he finally does get somebody who can teach him, they are. Yeah, Bloodraven's not entirely there. Perhaps we'll cover that a bit later, but he hasn't had that guidance. And in case I said I was going to say at one point, I'm obviously rambling away, but in case you're wondering, no, Jojen, he gets green dreams. Don't get me wrong, he understands this whole world, but Jojen is not a skin changer. He can't teach Bran about how to do that. He's also not somebody who has this the green seer powers. He wouldn't be able to hook himself up to the Weirwood network, have the Weirwood paste see things through the Weirwood trees. That's not a thing that Jojen can do. Jojen had powers, but not the exact same powers, just a small subsection of the powers that Bran did. So he could not teach him how to work them. Okay, so that was the not so brief introduction to Bran. Let's have a quick look in the chat. Ariel Winchester, hello, good to see you. Saying hi there, Robert. I do believe that Bran will be king. However, due to his age, do you think he will have a regent or council of regents? If so, who do you imagine taking on that role from potential survivors? Okay, this is an interesting one. Whether he will be king is a question which comes up a little bit later. I've got some questions about this, but let's assume he will. And the assumption, for those who don't know, the assumption comes from the fact that when somewhere between seasons 4 and 5, first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin was involved. He wasn't a showrunner, he wasn't in charge of stuff, but he wrote one episode per season. You can watch, if you watch it, you can see one episode per season. Writer, George R. R. Martin. And he was there, he was actively involved in it. And then at some point, but towards the end of season 4, he goes, I really need to focus on the books now. Now, insert your own comments at this point. He thought, you know what, I really need to write a bit more so that I can finish The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring before Game of Thrones finishes on TV. That was his thought at the time. But what he did was he said, I'll take a step back from doing the writing. Writing an episode of the TV show apparently took about a month of his time, not all in one period, but, spread out over a while with writes and rewrites and discussions with the production crew. Plus, he was sort of engaged on set a little bit. So he decided that was just a thing that he could take a step back from. And he did a handover meeting with the showrunners, with Dan and Dave. And it wasn't just a sit down for an hour, here's a few thoughts. This seems to have gone on, as far as we can tell, this was a few days. I think they came up to where he was, and they had a few days of long discussions. George R. R. Martin said, these are my plans, this is where I'm going. Even in all of that time, there were a few details. He admitted later that there were some smaller characters that he didn't tell them exactly what his plans were, but he told them where he was at that moment in time, what he was going to be doing. And out from that meeting, we're told that the showrunners had what they described as 3 WTF moments. 3 things that they were not expecting. One of them was Hodor, which again we will be talking about here. One of them was Shireen, and one of them they didn't name specifically, but it became apparent over time that it was King Bran. And that is what they presented, obviously, on the TV show as a thing that happens. And since then, people have been umming and ahhing about whether or not this will happen in the books. I think our default position is that it will. We can't be 100%. George R. R. Martin is a Gardner writer. He will shift things as he is writing. If something doesn't seem right, then he might change it. We've had an interview which actually happened just before Christmas of last year. It was only released, I think, in January of this year. Hollywood Reporter, I think it was. And he basically admitted that he had kind of sort of maybe changed his mind on the fates of at least one character as a result of what happened on the TV show, that character being Sansa. And so it's entirely possible that significant characters' fates will change as he is writing this. But our central thesis still remains that, as far as we're aware, Bran will become king at the end of all of this. He is currently 9, and that means that if he becomes king, certainly for a few years, this is different on the TV show, because on the TV show, I mean, I don't know how old Isaac Hempstead Wright was when he was filming that final season, but it wasn't 9, let's put it that way. He would have a regent or a council of regents. Who would be on it? I mean, I think your guess is as good as mine on that one. It's a matter of who survives, really. I think the best that we can come up with is looking at what happened with the regency of Aegon III after the Dance of the Dragons. So this is something which will fall out from the other side of House of the Dragon, is we have a young king, a boy king, and we need some regents to keep this realm safe and secure. And they decided not to have one regent, because if they had one regent, then that person would have huge amounts of power. They would be ruling as king. So they had this 7 regents, in fact. They had 7 kingdoms, 7 regents, and they tried to get a balance of all the different views and positions within the 7 kingdoms, so that the kingdom could just sort of keep on going on a steady keel until they reached the point where Aegon III reached his maturity and could become king. I suspect that that is what we're looking at here. We're looking at a council of regents. We're not looking at one regent. We're looking at a council of regents. So perhaps one from every bit of the 7 kingdoms. I mean, I don't know. This it's all speculating. If Tyrion survives, George R. Martin has also hinted in that same interview I was talking about a moment ago, has hinted that Tyrion's probably gonna not have the most optimistic of fates. Tragic, I think, was the word he used. But if Tyrion is around, then I think he's certainly going to have a role to play in what's going on. I think it's reasonable to expect somebody like Edmure Tully may well survive. There may well be some Dornish who survive. I mean, who knows? Not one person, but a council. Right, let's look at some questions from some of my patrons. Alex Hop saying Isaac was 19 when it was filmed. So there you go. He was 10 years older when season 8 was filmed. I assume that's what you mean. He was 10 years older than Bran is now, or double the age, more than double the age that Bran is now. In the books, there's a huge difference. Okay, Lady Pushkins. Robert, why don't I want Bran to be king? I didn't think I'm on my own with this feeling, and his backstory does fit for him to be king. Why do you think that we have these feelings? Maybe that most people like the traditional hero ending? So I thought this was a good place to start, because the fact that it's out there that Bran will be king, left a lot of people, nah, really? Okay. Um, so let's address this. First of all, first of all, I do understand this feeling. I kind of get it myself. I can remember when I watched it first. It was, oh, okay. So the reasoning doesn't seem to work out here. The who has the better story than Bran the Broken? That line didn't. I mean, I'm not alone in this, but that line didn't really land for me. So many characters have great stories in Game of Thrones. I don't think his story was better than anyone else's. So I don't think it's about the story. Um, the the reason why I think we don't instinctively like this idea is that we saw it and it's kind of came out of the blue. It was, oh, okay, so you're going to be king, fine. Um, we've had all of these other characters out there who potentially could have been king. Jon could have been king. Dany could have been queen. In the books, we've got Aegon the Sixth who could be king. We've got lots of people who potentially could be king, and then it's like, oh, okay, we'll go with that guy instead. So it didn't kind of hang right with a lot of people. It didn't quite hang right with me, I'll be honest, when I was first watching it. Um, if I were to defend it, my thought process would be along the lines of, let's be pragmatic at the end of all of this. Who has the power? Who survives? Who has been defeated and is no longer there? And if you start with that basis and just be purely politically pragmatic, you say, okay, so I don't think many people expect Dany to be ruling the Seven Kingdoms at the end of all of this. I don't think many people expect Jon. I think the Targaryens, most people think, are out of the picture. I don't think many people think that Stannis will, or the Baratheons as a whole. So the previous kings are no longer there. Ditto the Lannisters. I don't think many people are expecting Cersei to be hanging around being queen. I don't think many people are expecting Tyrion to be ascending the Iron Throne. So those previously powerful southern houses are not really in the running. So you then say, okay, well, who is really in the running? Now, I don't think anyone expects Dawn to be the most powerful nation, or the Iron Islands to be the most powerful nation. We're assuming that Euron is going to be killed at some point, because if he isn't, he's not going to stop. If he's not killed, he's not going to stop. So I think most people are assuming that Euron is going to be dealt with. Um, is the Riverlands really going to be the strongest after being devastated by war? The Riverlands is at the center of every war, physically at the center of every war. Are they going to be the most powerful grouping after all of this? What about the Tyrells? Well, I think most of us are probably expecting some version of what happened with the Cersei and the Sept of Baelor, whether it's exactly that or something else. Cersei is going to get her revenge big time on her misplaced revenge, let's put it that way, on the Tyrells. The Arryns, I mean, who's left? Sweet Robin? Probably not going to survive. So when you start eliminating all of these people, who's actually still going to be there? Well, probably most of the Starks will survive. If we assume that Jon is out of the picture, George R. Martin's now said that Sansa's probably going to survive. I think most of us think that Arya is going to survive. Um, we think Bran is going to survive. The Starks probably are going to be the strongest house at the end of all of this. What the TV show did was they created this great council. I'm putting it in inverted commas. With whatever it was, 12 people sat there in the dragon pit, deciding who's going to be the next king. Maybe that's a nod to what George R. R. Martin said, that there will be a great council. deciding who's going to be the king. And the Great Council decide it's going to be Bran. Now, if you keep this idea in your head of the idea that there will be a Great Council, which makes sense. This is what the Lords of Westeros do when they can't figure out who should inherit. They have a Great Council. Then you say, who is the most powerful house at that? On the TV show, if you looked at that, I can't remember if it was exactly 12, but it was about 12. Who was there? Well, we had 3 Starks there to start with. We had Sam, who's the best friend of Jon, who was effectively a Stark. We had Brienne, who had been in service to a Stark. You had Edmure Tully, who very clearly was under the control of the Starks. Probably a couple of other people I can't even think of who were very much Team Stark. They had the majority. Perhaps this was the TV show's kind of cut down way of showing that in a Great Council, who would have the power would be Team Stark. And then you go, well, who would Team Stark want on the Iron Throne? Or actually take a step back, where would this Great Council take place? In the Dragon Pit? Or where Great Councils take place in Westeros? Harrenhal. Do you think that there's any power out there near Harrenhal who might be able to influence events, perhaps basing themselves off of an island just a few short miles away from Harrenhal? It's entirely possible that the events of Harrenhal will be influenced by the Weirwood Network. Now, who do House Stark want? Well, if we assume that Jon's saying no, he doesn't want it, if we assume that Arya is going to stick with her position if she doesn't want to be a lady somewhere, then you've only got 2 possible candidates. We've got Sansa and we've got Bran. And if Sansa says, I've had enough of King's Landing, which is entirely reasonable given what happened to her there, the only remaining Stark candidate is Bran. So, if I were to defend this, that would be the route that I would be going down. That doesn't mean that I don't understand completely the feeling of, it doesn't kind of sit right. I think that it doesn't kind of sit right comes from the fact that what we had on the TV show was cut down hugely. We did not see all of the build up to this. The showrunners just generally like to sort of surprise people with stuff. Oh, you didn't see that twist coming. George R. R. Martin does like that, but he likes to build up to it a huge amount. So, yeah, it would not surprise me if Bran becomes king. If he does become king, then I think it will make sense within the books. I think it will be influenced by the Weirwood Network. I think it will be because the Starks have power. And I think fundamentally it will come back to this point that George R. Martin himself has made, is that the very first character he thought about when writing this book is Bran. Wasn't Daenerys, wasn't Jon, wasn't Tyrion. The very first character he thought of was Bran. The first image he had was of that the dead direwolf that had been killed by the stag with the direwolf pups. And then he thought of Bran there getting a direwolf pup. And then he thought, he should have some brothers and sisters. And then he worked his way out from that. So the first thought that he had, and the first chapter of the book, let's not forget, after the prologue, the first chapter of the book is from Bran's perspective. So it would kind of do a big arc if the last bit of this book is Bran being king and him having the last chapter. Right, let's go to Alex Hops saying, hello, Robert, hope you're well. New patron asking a question for the first time. It's fantastic to see you, and you are very welcome. Regarding the hodoring of poor Walder that happened in the show, this implies that Bran can have an effect on things through time, but it also implies a predestined sequence of events. Do you think all of the major events are predestined? And do you think there are other big events that we have witnessed that were tampered with through time? Okay, this kind of comes to the heart, I think, of a lot of the questions that we have about Bran. Is to what extent is he influencing things through time? Will he influence things through time? Well, first of all, let's look at the Bran influencing things, uh, events that we have already, and then see whether that answers a few questions about how this universe works, and then we'll try and work our way up from that. So we have in the books, we have a very clear moment when Bran goes through the weirwood tree in Winterfell. When he's up in Bloodraven's cave, he's given the weirwood paste. He sees his father. He calls out his father, Ned, who's dead by this point. He's dead a couple of years by now. And he turns around and says, "Who's there?" That very clearly shows that Bran influenced events in the past in a small way. That doesn't change anything much. That maybe it changed the way that Ned thought about stuff, whatever, but it didn't change any seismic events. And we have to come to the conclusion that that always happened. That happened in the past, that Ned heard something, turned around, said, "Who's there?" And then the cause of the "who's there" we only discover much later in time. So we then get other moments where we see Bran almost certainly calling out to Theon through the Winterfell. We've not seen that yet in the books, but very probably that's going to be happening at some point. And then we get what happened on the TV show. But because this was one of those three WTF moments, we have to kind of say, okay, this is, and George R. Martin has broadly confirmed this as well, is that's what happens in the books, is we get Bran in some way going back in time, telling Hodor to be holding the door, but he's going into the mind when he's gone back in time of young Walder, and then that becomes Hodor, and this creates what we call a closed time loop, because that always happened. All of Hodor's life was influenced by an event that was yet to happen. It changed him in his past, and that led to him following the path that he followed in order to get to the future that then went back to the past. So that's the kind of world we seem to be in, this kind of closed time loop world. The implication of which is that this isn't a Marvel Universe multiverse kind of thing, where things kind of go off and go off and go off and go off, unless you say we're only watching one of these things. So all of that said, your questions are all of the major events predestined? Well, to the extent that this does seem to be a world on a single timeline, but within this, people do have free will. Now, we have to interpret all of this through the fact that this is fantasy. And George R. R. Martin does not want us to have scientific or science fiction answers to any of these big questions. He wants us to have fantasy answers, which means that we can be a little bit more wibbly wobbly timey wimey about this, rather than trying to draw an exact graph of how everything works. And that allows free will within that context. I think that's the important thing here, is that it's not that we're just being told, here's the story that goes from A to B. We're being told the story where people have free will within their own kind of time frame. But there will be events where the powerful can go back and shift things in some way, big or small. And when we're talking the powerful, Bran certainly seems to have that power. Bloodraven, we assume, has that power, although he has said that you can't change things in the past. we don't know the extent to which we can believe him. Maybe he just doesn't want Bran to think that he can change things in the past. So, um, it's not a world of just predestined. This is exactly, we're just being told the things that have happened. This is a world where everybody does have the free will, but some powerful individuals have the ability to have gone back in time and created these kind of closed time loops. Are there any major events that might have been tampered with? I mean, that's the kind of question I'd love to throw out to the chat, because if we go down this route that George R. R. Martin seems to be pushing us to, which is that some events have been fixed and locked as having always have had happened. Have I got that right? Then what are those moments? For me, I think there probably are a certain amount of things where Bloodraven may well have gone back and tweaked events. But I generally am of the view that the big picture stuff we're not talking about, if only because the dramatic tension in the story is how do we stop the others? And if Bloodraven et al. Had the ability to go back and change something in the past so that the others never happened, they would have done that. So we're not just in this predestined, well, this is the best timeline that Bran / Bloodraven / whoever's got the power thinks is right. We're actually in a world of jeopardy. Okay, let's go to Goldberg saying George R. Martin confirmed Hodor. He absolutely confirmed Hodor. I mean, what he said with Hodor, just so everybody is aware, what he said was that he he clarified only that with Hodor, hold the door does not necessarily mean literally holding a door, which is what happened on the TV show. Hodor was there just literally holding a door shut. It could mean holding a doorway in a kind of a military sense. Yeah, hold the doorway, we'll escape. And so so Hodor is there, like fighting people off. And who knows? Maybe even Bran could be going. He does this. You go into Hodor's mind and actually control him and use the sword against whoever it is who's attacking them. Buttoned up reader saying, so what Robert's saying is that Arya Hota will become king. I mean, I don't think that's exactly what I'm saying. But yeah, whatever. Okay, let's go to a question from Zero. I like that comment. Zero. Hello, Robert. I was wondering about your thoughts on when Bran flees Bloodraven's cave. Do you think any of the children of the forest will survive the escape and help him flee south? Well, I don't like show comparisons. The children all died without much consequence to the story. Yeah, I don't think that the children will all die in the books. Partly because I don't think all of the children are up there. The implication I think was in the books, because they didn't really talk about the Isle of Faces at all, was that all of the children of the forest were up there in Bloodraven's cave. I don't think that's the case in the books. Now, might some of them escape? Yeah, why not? I'd see absolutely no reason why not. The implication is that there are ways out from Bloodraven's cave. We're not just talking about the way that they came in. There's also there's a river, we're told, underground river. So maybe they can escape through that. Probably a lot of the children of the forest will get killed in whatever happens up there, but a lot of them are actually hooked up to the Weirwood network, so they're kind of stuck there. It's a bit sad, a bit tragic, but that's the way it is. Zero also asking, there's been a lot said about Nymeria's super pack of wolves, but Summer quietly built a small pack of wolves in the story. Do you think these wolves will play any larger role in the story or just protecting Bran? Right, so when we've got Nymeria's super pack of wolves. That the first thing to say is that is on a completely different scale to what's going on with Summer. The super pack of wolves, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's like a couple of hundred wolves they're estimating. It's a lot of wolves. What happens with Summer is he doesn't stumble across, he finds some wolves and he defeats the pack leader, who's this one-eyed wolf, and then he becomes the leader of that pack. And that pack then are there as Bran and Co are heading north. They help out, taking out a few bad guys who come to sort of harass them along the way. And when they reach Bloodraven's cave, then Summer is there. Bran can walk into Summer outside Bloodraven's cave when Summer goes with his mini wolf pack, goes off hunting and the like. What we as readers know, Bran, he's vaguely aware, but he doesn't know any of this level of detail. This is Varamir Sixskin's wolf pack, small wolf pack, 3 wolves. And when Varamir, in his prologue chapter, tried to get, first of all, to walk into Thistle, a woman, failed. Thought briefly about going to try and find John's direwolf, failed, or decided not to, and then eventually goes into his own wolf, One Eye. That is the wolf that is the head of this small wolf pack. So what we've got is this link to another part of this story, that Summer is now the head of this wolf pack. What's going to happen with them? I don't think the fact that Varamir is in there is going to have a major impact on things, because he has said, and we think it's true, that the longer you stay with your second life, as they call it, in your bonded animal, the more the animal takes over. And slowly you just kind of like soften and just become a part of that animal. So I'm expecting Varamir Sixskins to just slowly disappear within his wolf. Now, it's possible, if that wolf comes back into contact with John and Ghost, it's possible at that point that there may be a little bit of a friction, because the bonded animal of a skin changer, when it sees someone who it counts as responsible in some way. I mean, this wasn't John's, but he didn't like John. Then with that person's death, then they may start to attack. So possibly there's going to be a bit of a friction when he comes into contact with John, but broadly speaking, no, I don't think Varamir is going to be a central part of this. I think you're right that the main role here is that these wolves are going to be defending Bran on the way back, because Jojen's not going to be there, Hodor's not going to be there, Bloodraven's not going to be there, probably most of the Children of the Forest are not going to be there. Cold Hands, we don't know. But who is going to help them? We've got Maura on her own, dragging Bran across the snow. Maybe they'll have some kind of clever underground route going, but they need some protection, and the wolves are going to be providing that. Raman Lukovic saying, will Bran regret walking into Hodor once he understands all the implications, or will his time in the cave completely strip him of his humanity? I mean, I think this is an interesting one, because again, this comes back to the morality. So I don't think he's going to get a morality lesson from Bloodraven. if you read that last chapter, that last Bran chapter, you have the training chapter basically for Bran. It's dark. It is dark, not just literally dark. Bloodraven saying you'll grow to like the dark and things like that. It's there, but it's like every time we get like this mention of time passing, we're told the moon was like a sickle, sharp like a sickle. It's just like the language here is harsh and sharp. The the coloring is dark. The implications of what's happening to Jojen and the like are grisly. So this is not an upbeat chapter. And Bloodraven is not there teaching Bran all of the niceties about stuff. Bloodraven seems to have uh, a clear understanding. It will take him some time to learn these things, but at the same time, there is a kind of a ticking time bomb going on here. So, um, will Bran regret Hodor? I think when he realizes what happened. So this is the bit that we don't know, but I think will hugely change Bran's mindset on this. Is that on the TV show, he watches Walder become Hodor, and as he realizes what's happening is when we're realizing what's happening, when he starts just saying, "Hold the door, hold the door, hold the door, Hodor, Hodor, Hodor." That's the moment that we realize. It's also the moment that he realizes. We don't know. That's how they did it on the TV show. We don't know if that is how it's going to happen in the books. Will Bran understand? Will he just say, Hodor, hold the door? And as he disappears somewhere, sees Hodor going, Hodor, Hodor, in which case he might never understand, which would be even more tragic in my mind. So I kind of hope that he will see that transformation. And I think if he does see that transformation, it will dawn on him what he has done. And I think that will make him think twice about going into another human again. Let's go to a question from where did we get up to? Sir Friend, happy, very warm Thursday. Yes, it's got quite nice here in England actually today. And it will be very warm over the weekend, I think. Do you think Bran's crush on Mira will go anywhere? I'm conscious the story probably won't go on long enough for him to get married, even if he wants to, but a union between houses Stark and Reed would be satisfying on a number of levels. I don't think it's set in stone that Bran can't have kids. Not that that has to be a factor anyway. The TV show really did Mira dirty, and I hope we can at least avoid that fate. Best wishes, warmest regards, and to you. So, marriage between them. I mean, let's just go back to those ages. Bran is 9. She is probably 17, maybe 16. At this point of time, we're not going to. This is beyond the scope of the story. Those two marrying, if they ever did. Bran does, in case you missed it in the books, yeah, he does seem to have some sort of a crush on Mira. It's probably the best way of saying it. He's 9. He doesn't really know what it is. That people have gone down some rather dark paths speculating about this because Bran um, uh, can walk into an adult man's body, Hodor. Let's not go down that route because those aren't pleasant thoughts. But he doesn't really know. He doesn't understand these feelings he's getting. He's 9. So as for what you're saying, is it set in stone that Bran can't have kids? I don't think it is set in stone. And I don't think that makes much difference in these kind of things. Where he's probably going to end up, if he ends up being king, then the line "he can't have children" is probably going to be a positive factor for him, because it just means that, oh well, we get to decide again when he dies. We get to decide again who's going to be king. So I, I think that's all okay. In terms of Mira, yeah, they did do her dirty. So she goes all the way up to Bloodraven's cave, drags him all the way down. I mean, this is hundreds of miles, dragging what on the TV show was a teenage boy who was not thankful, through the snow and ice, and then through the wall, and then even further on to Winterfell. And this was a, not an easy task, and she did it uncomplainedly. And then Bran sort of says, "Yeah, well, that's it. You played your part. You can go now." That it felt heartless. It felt as though what was trying to happen, or what the showrunners were trying to do, was to use Mira as a way for us to understand that Bran had changed, because no reasonable human would do that. That was a human without a heart doing that. And will that happen in the books? No, I don't think it will happen in the books. I do wonder whether she might go south. I do wonder whether she might feel as if her duty has been done, but it's not so much her wanting to stay, and Bran saying, "No, no, you can go now." It would be her proactively thinking, "I really should tell my parents that Jojen's dead," and perhaps, given what we know or who we know her parents are, perhaps she will be the one to go, "Oh, and hey, father, Howland Reed, maybe now's a good time for you to head back up." So I think she will have a role. I think that the showrunners on the TV show just wanted to use her to show us a change in Bran, and I don't think we should take too many guidelines from that. Literary dilettante, thank you very much. Saying hi, Robert, and all mods. Oh, yes, moderators. Let's do a quick shout out to the moderators. If you are here watching this live on YouTube, then the reason why the chat is such a wonderful place is because the moderators do such a fantastic job. If you could give them a little bit of love, I would hugely appreciate that. If you're watching this live on either X or Facebook, hi, I see you too. I've said this a few weeks now. I'm trying to figure out how we can do that better for both of you guys, or both the different places. Watch this space. The other group of people I want to thank, because I always want to thank, are my patrons. If you do want to support this channel, thank you so much. The best way to do that is via Patreon. There is a link somewhere. So that's my way of thanking you, is by prioritizing your questions. But Literary Dilettante saying, hi, Robert, running between airport terminals. Oh, hope you're off to somewhere exciting. So this is the only time I get to be live, given the time difference. Nothing but love, appreciation. These complete my week and make me look forward to the next one. Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. No idea where you are, or why, or what time differences you're normally on, but I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Let's go to a question from where were we at? Maura Lee. Hi, Maura, if you're there. Will we be able to see further north of the wall through Bran's powers? Will we see Benjen's fate? And what else might we see? Okay, so this is, I think, I assume a question based on something George R. R. Martin has said, which is that in the next book, or the next couple of books, we will see further north than we ever have so far. And he's also said that he's not going to be doing any new major POV characters, which means probably the way we're going to see this is through one of 3, 4 ways. Maybe we'll have a prologue or epilogue that covers it. Who knows? Not the prologue to The Winds of Winter, because we've already been told roughly who that is. I did a video on it on my main channel if you're interested. Or maybe a character who has been up there, say Benjen, comes back and then just does this. Here's my exposition of the things that I found. Maybe. My most likely feeling is that this is going to be Bran, who Bloodraven has told will be able to see beyond the trees at some point. He can go back through the Weirwood network. He can go to Weirwood trees and see out through their eyes at different points in the past. Bloodraven is telling him at some point, you're not just looking at through the tree's eyes, you can move beyond. And if you can move beyond, that means that you can move, theoretically, far north. What I would draw your attention to, in case you missed this, and don't worry if you did, because a lot of people did, because this was really early in the books, Bran has already seen far to the north, further north than any other character. We get this. There's that chapter, if you remember, there's a chapter where he climbed up the tower, Jaime pushes him out, he goes into a coma. And we get a chapter of him in a coma. This is the only kind of like weirdly magical chapter within the entirety of book one, between the prologue and the very last chapter, between the others and the dragons. The only really magic-y chapter we get is this coma dream chapter. And we often think about it as being he's falling and you get the three-eyed crow and you get the weirwood tree and you have to fly. That bit we remember. But he sees a lot while he's there. He's up, figuratively up, way, way up high, because he's falling. And he looks east and he looks south and he looks west and he sees huge amounts of things that are actually going on out there in the Seven Kingdoms. But then he looks north. And this is what we read. It's quite a longish quote, but I think it's an interesting one. So finally, he looked north. He saw the wall, shining like blue crystal, and his bastard brother John sleeping alone on a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him, which, just as a complete aside, is very early foreshadowing of John being dead in an ice cell. His bastard brother John sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. And he looked past the wall, past endless forests cloaked in snow, past the frozen shore and the great blue-white rivers of ice, and the dead plains where nothing grew or lived. North and north and north he looked, to the curtain of light at the end of the world. And then beyond that curtain, he looked deep into the heart of winter. And then he cried out, afraid, and the heat of his tears burned on his cheeks. Now you know, the crow whispered as it sat on his shoulder. Now you know why you must live. Why? Bran said, not understanding, falling, because winter is coming. So this is really early on, but it's, I think, quite massive. Bran has already seen. He's somewhere deep inside him. He has already seen the others, the Heart of Winter, their home base, something. The reason why he needs to be scared, because winter is coming. I think he will do that again. The implication, I think, is that this was Bloodraven giving him that dream. Bloodraven can see these things. Bloodraven can go beyond the trees. Bloodraven knows what's up there. Bloodraven was sharing that with Bran. And he wanted Bran to understand the threat. So, yes, I think is the answer. It will be through Bran that we see north and north and north, in the words of that quote there. Might that, because you asked, might that mean that he sees Benjen's fate? Quite possibly. I think we will find out about Benjen's fate. And because this was set up as such a big mystery, all the way through, John is always wondering what happened to Benjen. Where's Benjen? He gets north of the wall, so I wonder whether we'll find Benjen here. He's always thinking that is set up so much that we have to find out. So we will find out, I'm pretty sure, about what happened to Benjen. Something else I'm going to say now. Can't remember. Doesn't matter. I think the main point is that Bran, yes, I think Bran will see north and north and north. Okay, let's go to Scott Crosby saying, hello, in the Game of Thrones TV show, I may be wrong in remembering, as I haven't watched the last 2 seasons for a while, but what difference does Bran's powers actually make to the story? I'm wondering the same in the books, as it hasn't advanced out of the cave yet. But it seems like as much as the story starts with him, and he may end up as king, hopefully not, says Scott, but what impact does or will he have on the story going forward? So, I mean, I think we need to be honest and say that this was one of the storylines that was not finished in a particularly satisfactory way. Bran goes north. He learns all these powers. He becomes possibly the most powerful person in the Seven Kingdoms. Comes back to Winterfell, and as the others attack, he just kind of sits there as bait. So, was that his role? Bait? Well, on the TV show, his powers came in useful in a few different ways, which may provide some hints for the books. First of all, there was information. We, as viewers, discovered stuff through Bran. We discovered the origin of the White Walkers. We discovered Jon's parentage. So we got information there. Secondly, there was the I'm going to say the rather odd incident of Bran when he saw the Night King in his visions, dreams, and then there was that moment where the Night King grasped hold of him, and that link somehow seemed to break the barrier around Bloodraven's cave, which meant that the others and the Night King could come in and they could attack, and that's what forced Bran and Cade to escape. I say that was a bit odd because then we don't really hear about it afterwards, other than the fact that there now appears to be some kind of a link. We're not told why did that particular link mean that the barrier came down or anything along those lines. But that was the second significant thing that happened there. And the third in the TV show, the significant thing from Bran's powers was that he set up the ending in a way. He gave the dagger to Arya. She used it to kill the Night King. And he set himself up as the bait. So he was in the right place. Now, as best we understand it from what we get from the TV show, in the TV show, the White Walkers were created by plunging dragonglass into the heart of the Night King in front of a weirwood tree, and then the magic that created him was undone by putting Valyrian steel into his heart in front of a weirwood tree. Now, Bran set that up. He made sure that he was in front of the weirwood tree. He made sure that he was the bait, so the Night King would be there, and then Arya herself could come, and he gave her the weapon that would do the thing. So those are the three broad things in the TV show that Bran's powers did. Information, this kind of breaking down of the barrier thing, and that setting up the end of the White Walkers. I do try to hesitate before trying to take direction from the TV show. I don't try and take direction from the TV show and trying to understand what's going to happen in the books. But you're entirely right. We are at this point. We're before each of those moments, so we do not know whether or not that is going to be the case here. I think it seems incredibly likely we will get information via Bran. We, the readers, will get information via Bran. I think we've already got some information. We've seen, I mean, it's not plot critical, but we saw what we're pretty sure is Sir Duncan the Tall and Old Nan, which we as readers think is probably more important than Bran would have done. And we've seen, we'll come on to this, but we've seen the sacrifice before the Winterfell Weirwood tree of a Bran Stark, which I think is probably going to turn out to be quite significant. So we've started getting bits of information there. I see absolutely no reason why we're not going to carry on getting bits of information. I think the fact that he has sort of already gone north implies that he probably will again, and I think that we will get more information about the others, who they are, what they want, via him. Will we get information about Jon? I mean, there are other places that we can get that information from. We could get it from Sam. Howland Reed, I think, is probably the most likely. But maybe Bran will give us some information there as well. So I think, yes, Bran's powers in the books will give us information. This breaking down the barrier around the Night King's, not the Night King's, Bloodraven's cave. I call what I can't remember what I called it. Odd, intriguing, because they didn't expand or explain what was going on there. I have often wondered, and I'm not alone in this, I've often wondered whether the magic outside of Bloodraven's cave is kind of similar to the magic that's in the wall. It certainly seems to stop the undead from passing through. Cold Hands can't go past the wall, he can't go into Bloodraven's cave. The Whites outside can't go into Bloodraven's cave. They can't cross the wall. So the implication here is that it's roughly the same sort of magic. We also know that something must attack Bloodraven's cave because Hodor is holding the door against attackers. So is something similar going to happen? I mean, it's certainly possible. Otherwise, you have to wonder how they might get in. So maybe. And it does open, and I'm not saying this is what I think is going to happen, but I think it is a possibility, is that if we then do get this magical idea where if in the kind of the green dream world, whatever it is, the others and Bran can make contact, and that contact can break the spell that protects Bloodraven's cave, because they seem to be on different sides, and therefore one can now cross over to the other. Is that principle the same with the wall? Is Bran going south of the wall going to actually allow the others to go south of the wall? I mean, it's possible. It would have to have a whole lot more explaining in the books than it did in the show, though. So that's the second one. And the third thing that the show did was that Bran kind of set up the ending of the Night King. It's not going to happen the same in the books. Bran's not going to be sort of sitting there as bait and just kind of waiting until Arya comes and does something. The showrunners happily said they decided it was going to be Arya. This wasn't a thing from George R. R. Martin. They decided they wanted it to be Arya. So the clear implication is that this is going to be quite different in the books. That doesn't mean, though, that Bran is not going to play a role. I think he almost certainly will play a role in setting up the way that the others are defeated. Now, I've long held this view that the others will be defeated not by killing them all in combat, but by undoing whatever magic created them or brought them into being. And I think that is something Bran can see happen, what happened to start with, and then he can perhaps work to understand how can you undo that. So that's how I see those powers operating for Bran. It would be a shame for him not to use his powers in clever ways that we don't yet know, though, because he will have the greatest powers, magical powers, out of anyone you could imagine in Westeros. Not perhaps in kind of like shooting out fireballs kind of way, but he will be able to travel to any point in time and space within Westeros, as far as we can tell, and see what happened, which means that the greatest thing that he has is the power of information, the power of understanding, the power of knowing things. And when he's there, he can start influencing stuff. I feel 90% certain that he will start to influence things. Probably he's going to try and save Theon's life through the Winterfell trees on that little island. I'll do a whole video on it. But I think he's going to start influencing events behind the scenes in a way that is a lot more proactive than Bloodraven would teach him is possible. Okay. Brothers Bradley, a good name, saying, my favorite couple of hours of the week. Oh, that means a lot. Bran has the best story equals king? Question mark. I don't know about you, but I doubt that would fly. And does he really have the best story? Yeah, I sort of kind of touched on this earlier. No, I don't think he has the best story. And I don't think having the best story makes him king. I think that was one of several things that didn't really land in season 8, but the finale. What I will say, what I think they were trying to touch on, let's put it this way, is something that I think George R. R. Martin will do at a more meta level, which is something I think he is already doing at a more meta level, but we haven't really kind of always clicked it. He is telling this story in two ways. He is telling the story, and when I say this story, the story of Westeros, in two ways. One way is lived experience. We see A Song of Ice and Fire through first-person POV. This is the story from Cersei's perspective, which is very different from the story from Jaime's perspective. Even when you're seeing the same elements, the same events happening, they are interpreting things in very different ways. And you're seeing it from Daenerys' perspective, and you're seeing it from all the Starks' perspectives. And we're seeing this story from lived experience. And that's coming without judgment, without comment. We're just being told what that person's thoughts are, what that person sees and feels and experiences at any given moment in time. This is lived experience, chapter by chapter by chapter. We get the same in Dunk and Egg. This is from Dunk's perspective. On the TV show, I love the TV show, but they did a couple of times break from this and go over to Egg's perspective. So we just saw things that Egg was doing. But in the books, and George R. R. Martin has said that he has considered changing this, but he decided not to. It's all from Dunk's perspective. We only see what's going on from his perspective. We hear his thoughts. This is his lived experience. So that is the first way that we are learning about this world, is through the lived experience. Then we get Fire and Blood and the World of Ice and Fire, which are telling us this story as a history. A historian is telling us what happened and is saying, okay, so this evidence is suggesting this thing. This witness is saying that happened. That witness is saying something else has happened. Here's my view about what seems the most likely. And that's the second way that we're understanding about this world, is through this recorded history. Now, that, I think, is what George R. Martin is doing at a kind of a meta level, is he's showing us this world in two completely different ways. And I think he is going to show through A Song of Ice and Fire the kind of tension between them. The Weirwood Network is collecting the lived experiences of those who are kind of sucked up to within it. That the Weirwood Network is not just trees. This is connected under pretty much all of Westeros. This is the Westerosi first-person narrative experience and understanding. And Bran is going to be embodying that because he can access all of this through the Weirwood Network, and he can see things and he can experience things. And that is where that side of this story is being told. The other side is the recorded history. Now, on the TV show, you remember they did this bit at the end when Sam comes in and says, oh, look, the Maesters have already written the history of this time. Boom, here you go. Tyrion, you're not in here at all. It was a little joke they did at the end there, but I think this was them trying to show the difference between these two sides. And I suspect we're going to start getting Tyrion thinking about how is his life going to be remembered by this. So that's perhaps not the question you were asking, but it's something I find fascinating about George R. Martin's writing style, is that he has chosen these deliberately two very different ways of giving us information about this world, and allowed us to kind of understand the strengths and weaknesses of each of them. Because we might instinctively go, well, the lived experience is the best, but he has repeatedly told us about the problem of unreliable narrators. And we might instinctively go, oh, well, the histories they're not the right way through this. But perhaps we can also see from that, well, there is an attempt at being slightly more objective about this, about not just seeing things from one person's perspective, but trying to balance all of these different views. So I think that that's what he's trying to do at a more meta level. To try and bring this all back here, does he really have the best story? No, I don't think he's got the best story. I think this is just a part of the showrunners trying to nod towards this bigger issue that George R. Martin has been coming up with. Literary dilettante with a clarification, flight details clarification. We love this live information about flight delays from Delhi to Hanoi. As Robert was wondering, okay, well, I've been to Delhi. I have not been to Hanoi, but I hope it's wonderful. It certainly looks nice from what I've seen. Happy and annoyed. Been rereading and noticed that Bran always thinks of Jon as his half-brother. Do you reckon that perception is a plot point? It is a tad jarring, and why perpetuate it? He likes Jon. But yes, he does. I mean, it's a thing I've sort of noticed. He does often say this. A lot of the Starks do. The younger Starks. It kind of feels like Robb was brought up. They're of an age. They were brought up more like brothers. Those two. Sansa has got a lot of more of a sense as she is growing up. A lot more of a sense of this. More sort of courtly life and what is acceptable and what's not acceptable and that kind of thing. Bran and Rickon just seem very young, and they're told that he's their half brother, so that's what he is. Arya is slightly different. It does sometimes make me wonder whether this is a hangover from George R. R. Martin's very, very, very original idea was that there was going to be some bad blood between Bran and Jon. Perhaps it's a bit of that. But I think basically this started out like that. George R. R. Martin started writing it like that because this feels like the right character point. And then let's not forget, Bran has not seen Jon for all of this story. He's not got closer to Jon. Jon left him when he was 7 years old. And since then, he's had no contact at all. So there's no reason for him to shift it to go, oh, yeah, actually, now I think about it, he really is my brother in spirit. So, yeah, he would carry on thinking of him as his half brother. Let's go to another question here somewhere from SGH saying, might Jon and Bran come into conflict, potentially over the Iron Throne, mirroring Daeron the Good and Daemon Blackfire? Daeron the Good, so this is Daeron the First, and Daemon Blackfire. So Daeron was the king at the time. Daemon Blackfire was the Blackfire pretender, and there was a civil war between the two of them over who should be sitting on the Iron Throne. I don't think that. Well, first of all, I don't think Bran, although one could see some echoes, but from between Bran and Daeron, and the show tried to create one, but he's not a Targaryen, and I don't think that Jon will want the Iron Throne. The only bit that I kind of gives me pause is that when we're thinking about Daemon Blackfire, we think of him as the Blackfire Rebellions. He's the person who wanted to be king. He wasn't really the person who wanted to be king. This was Bittersteel, who was the person who was pushing this all the time. So Jon is not. Daemon wasn't actually the driving force, and I think it's entirely possible or likely that as and when Jon understands his heritage, he's not going to be the person saying, I want to be king, but there may well be other people behind him who say he wants to be king. I do not think those two will come into conflict, though, I have to say. Right, let's go with Weirwood saying, echoing what I was saying. I think it was drilled into him. This is about the half brother thing by Cat. I'm sure every time Bran said brother, she and Sansa corrected him to half brother. I think that probably makes sense. James Perkins, my question today pertains to Bran's weirwood visions following his consumption of the paste of weirwood seeds. We see him going all the way back to some of the earliest memories of the Winterfell heart tree, at least where it concerns the Stark family, seeing a captive man being sacrificed to the tree by a bearded man and a white-haired woman. Given the somewhat ambiguous phrasing of this section, you and others have me and others have concluded that it is the captive being sacrificed here, not our modern-day Bran, that is the Brandon Stark mentioned in the passage, and that it is probably not just any Brandon Stark, but Brandon the Builder Stark. If this is the case, if this is the legendary founder of House Stark, architect of the Wall, Winterfell crypts, etc., why is he a captive? Who is performing the sacrifice seemingly against the will of said Bran the Builder? If the sacrifice of a Brandon Stark to the Winterfell weirwood tree is what bound the Starks to the land there, laid the foundations of pretty significant magical power, who would have done it? Adding to the confusion, why, if he was sacrificed against his will, would the people who subjugated him allow his descendants to go on to become one of the greatest family dynasties in all of known Planetos? Okay. So the language is uh, unclear. It has to be said, deliberately so in George R. R. Martin's case. We get this vision. So for those who just need catching up briefly, Bran, he gets the weirwood paste. It gives him the power to be seeing through the eyes of weirwood trees. He instinctively seems to uh, go through the Winterfell weirwood tree, probably because he knows that the best, and instinctively seems to see people who he has a connection to, which reminds me to a thing about half an hour ago. I said, oh, I had another thought and I've forgotten what it was. This was the thought. If Bran does look to the north, his experience of looking through the weirwood trees is that he does seem to be gravitating towards people who are meaningful to him personally. And so that seems to make it more likely in my mind that he might see his uncle, Benjen Stark. But to return back here, he sees his father, he sees Benjen and Lyanna, he sees old Nan, as he sort of goes back through time and sees characters that have some kind of link with him. And eventually he sees this character who is dragged in front of the weirwood tree, forced onto his knees, and sacrificed. And then it ends, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it's ambiguously says something like, and Brandon Stark could taste the blood in his mouth. And it's not 100% clear whether the Brandon Stark here is a reference to the person we're looking at or the Bran Stark that we know. As I say, deliberately vague terminology by George R. R. Martin there. So why might it? I mean, I have speculated this might be Bran the Builder. I don't think it necessarily has to be, but it is a Brandon, and it makes sense that it is a Brandon Stark. So we do already have, yes, there have been a lot of Bran Starks, but already we're closing it down a little bit. We can close it down even further by saying that this is a Bran Stark from what we're going to assume is certainly a long way back in history, probably somewhere near the start of the Stark time there. So if it's not Bran the Builder, then it's another Bran from around that time. We're not talking about lots of different candidates here. He's one of only a small handful of possible candidates. So that's why we have to consider the possibility that this is him. We also have to take the possibility that if we think that this is, as I do, this is a sacrifice before the Winterfell weirwood tree in order to create some great magic. I think this is potentially the magic which binds the Starks to Winterfell, to the Winterfell crypts, and so on. If so, you would need a pretty big sacrifice. King's blood. At the time, the Starks were the Kings of Winter. This is King's blood. So I think we're looking at an early Stark king. As I say, probably. I can't be 100%. We've only got a paragraph on this one, but it kind of makes sense. It's definitely early. It's almost certainly a Brandon Stark. And if it looks like a sacrifice, and if it's a sacrifice, then you're wanting some pretty powerful blood sacrifice, a king. Yeah, it adds up, but we can't be sure. So what does this mean? Well, if this is something along those lines, then this is tying the Starks to Winterfell. Which what does this mean for the story for our Bran? Is that if we're going way back later on with our Bran who leaves Winterfell, and then the Boltons come in and they they become the new lords of Winterfell. That breaks this "there must always be a Stark in Winterfell" thing. And that's when it starts snowing. Winter falls in Winterfell. I actually use one of the compilations I've done. If you're interested, some of the sort of vague series that I've done over time, I've started putting together into just long videos, one long video of an hour and a half, 2 hours long. So do check them out. One of them was my Winterfell Crypts, the Starks kind of random series of videos. And to me, it becomes very apparent that winter does fall very strongly on Winterfell, not as I initially thought when Bran and co leave, but when the Boltons marry Ramsay to fake Arya and they declare themselves Lords of Winterfell. That's the point at which things change really badly. The winter comes down, the snow comes down to an extent that the rest of the North does not experience. Stannis starts marching what should be, I think, 2 weeks' march from Deepwood Motte to Winterfell, and the sun's out. It's quite nice. There's a little bit of a light frost on the floor. They're going, well, maybe it might snow at some point. It seems okay weather. He doesn't even get to within a couple of days of Winterfell because the snow gets so heavy and it basically stops them moving. Within Winterfell, Theon holds out his hand. He can't see his hand in front of him because the snow is coming down that thickly. The very end, when we get that last Theon chapter and he's escaping, he looks back for just one moment and he does not see the castle because it's so covered in snow. So this is massive amount of snow going on there. And that requires a Stark to come back and be Lord again. Question from Buttoned Up Reader. How do you think George R. R. Martin will be able to write a convincing path to the throne for Bran, given the removal of the 5-year gap? Will there be a lengthy prologue or potentially another king or queen abdicates? So no, I don't think it's going to be like an. This is going to be like one of the last few chapters, I think, in the book, and I think we will get. Once everything is finished, I don't think we're going to get this kind of 20 years later idea. I think he's going to finish the story off. I think we'll get a few chapters just to show things returning to how they, not how they were, but how they will be from now on. And one of those will be some kind of hastily pulled together great council to decide who's now in charge. And I think that is because King's Landing will be devastated in some way. The people who had been claiming the Iron Throne were all gone. Nobody really understands now who's next in line because the Targaryens aren't there, and Jon says he doesn't want it. The Baratheons have probably all gone. Don't know about Stannis, but I don't think people want him to be king. The Lannisters, nobody wants, but anyway, Cersei's gone, and all of her children have gone. So it's like, well, where do we go? And so I think this is the starting point. We have something akin to a great council, and then they have to come together and go, well, who's going to do this? And it's a matter of who holds the balance of power. So this is, I mean, George R. R. Martin often talks about the scouring of the Shire at the end of The Lord of the Rings. And he says he thinks it's amazing. He really loves it. He thinks it's brilliant. And you have to try and get into it. What is it that's so brilliant about this? Well, this is at the end of all of this, our heroes return having sort of grown literally and figuratively, gained abilities and strengths, and then they get to recover their own homeland. And it's never going to be exactly the same as it was, but they can make it sort of good again. And what we kind of forget about that is that Frodo kind of checks out, as you can understand. But the other three, they get positions of great power. Sam becomes the mayor of Mickle Delving, basically the titular head of the Shire for seven year reigns in a row. The other two, Merry and Pippin, both gain their probably more feudalistically aligned titles passed down to them, but basically they then rule at the end of all of this. And I think that if you take that echo across into A Song of Ice and Fire, then who are the hobbits? Well, probably we're looking at the Starks, who start off in their happy family home at the very beginning of this, and then life intervenes and they have to head out into the world, and eventually they'll come back towards it. That's, if we're looking for echoes, that's the kind of echoes we're looking for. And so I think we should be expecting them to be holding some kind of brokerage power at the end. So will there be another king or queen who abdicates? No, I think there's going to be no one sitting on the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne may not even exist. There's a power vacuum, and then the lords of whoever happens to be standing at the end of all of this gets to decide. SGH, while speaking to Bran, Cold Hands refers to Bloodraven as a dreamer. Does this mean that he is both a green seer and a dragon dreamer? Well, quite possibly. But a green seer means that he can get green dreams, and that's probably what Cold Hands. I mean, we don't know 100% who Cold Hands is. I've got my ideas. I did a video on it. I've done a couple of videos on it actually now as well. But probably he's referring to green dreams rather than dragon dreams. But Bloodraven, I think, probably does get dragon dreams. Okay, let's go. Agree with saying just because there was no 5-year gap before, that doesn't mean there can't be a future gap if he gets over the issues, like there being no Cersei. Then why not? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to rule it out. I mean, I've said a number of times, I don't think there's going to be like a 20 years later. So the Harry Potter, if you've never read the Harry Potter books, at the very end of the Harry Potter books, there's like it's been a while, but I think there's like a chapter at the very end, which is, and now they're all grown up and they're sending their children off to Hogwarts. And so this is what happened to them all kind of chapter. I don't think George R. Martin is going to be giving us that, but I agree. Yeah, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. He could sort of say, ... and then 5 years later, this is what the situation is. They've all grown up a little bit, because I've been emphasizing this Bran is 9 thing. By the end of this, then let's say he's I don't know, 11, and it's entirely possible that, yeah, you could do a 5-year thing after that. Everyone's just trying to figure out how to get through all of this. We don't need a king yet, and that finally, after everyone's taken a long deep breath for a couple of years, they come back together, and Bran is then 15, 16, and maybe he could be king. That's a possibility. Let's go to Yeldenil, saying, "Hi Robert, in one of John's chapters, John hears Bran's voice from a weirwood while having a wolf dream. Do you think Bran will play a role in John's resurrection and/or his crypt dreams? I hope you and Dan are having a lovely week. All love to the moderators, fellow patrons, and channel members." Well, thank you. So he did actually. I've got to the dream that bit. It's a little bit long, but I enjoy reading this stuff. The context here is John is north of the wall. he is there with Corin Halfhand. He's been sent off to try and figure out what on earth is going on, while the rest of the Night's Watch hold position at the Fist of the First Men. And they're also kind of hoping maybe they might be able to figure out what's going on with Benjen. Meanwhile, Bran is in Winterfell. Theon has taken over, but then in come Ramsay et al., and Bran and the others hide in Winterfell crypts. This is while we get that whole business with Theon thinking, oh, they've gone missing. I have to find a couple of kids and make it look like them so that everyone thinks that I killed them, so then nobody thinks that I let them escape, etc., etc. While that bit's going on, Bran, Rickon, and the others are down in the Winterfell crypts. And Bran spends a reasonable amount of his time sort of sitting there in the dark. They dare not have too many lights going on, obviously, down there in the dark. And he spends a lot of his time skin changing into summer. But we read this from Jon's perspective, and he's there. He's not having the best of times. Poor Jon. I mean, Bran's not having the best of times. No one's having the best of times. But Jon is there, and sometimes he sleeps. And he's there on the edge of a mountainside, and we read this. When he closed his eyes, he dreamt of direwolves. There were 5 of them, where there should have been 6, and they were scattered, each apart from the others. He felt a deep ache of emptiness, a sense of incompleteness. The forest was vast and cold, and they were so small, so lost. His brothers were out there somewhere, and his sister, but he had lost their scent. He sat, so just to brief context there, Jon is north of the wall, and with Ghost, the others are south of the wall, and the wall does seem to sort of kind of cut off communications, hence this I can't smell them business. But there had been 6, there are now only 5. Lady has been killed by this point. So that's the kind of context we've got going on there. He sat on his haunches and lifted his head to the darkening sky, and his cry echoed through the forest, a long, lonely, mournful sound. As it died away, he prickled up his ears, listening for an answer, but the only sound was the sigh of blowing snow. Jon? The call came from behind him, softer than a whisper, but strong, too. Can a shout be silent? He turned his head, searching for his brother, for a glimpse of a lean grey shape moving between the trees, but there was nothing, only a weirwood. It seemed to sprout from solid rock, its pale roots twisting up from a myriad of fissures and hairline cracks. The tree was slender compared to other weirwoods he had seen, no more than a sapling, yet it was growing as he watched, its limbs thickening as they reached for the sky. Wary, he circled the smooth white trunk until he came to the face. Red eyes looked at him, fierce eyes they were, yet glad to see him. The weirwood had his brother's face. Had his brother always had 3 eyes? Not always, came the silent shout. Not before the crow. He sniffed at the bark, smelled wolf, and so this is Bran. His brother here is Bran, and Bran, a sapling of a weirwood tree, because he's still young, but growing very quickly. And the implication is that Jon is expecting this link with his siblings to be via the direwolves, because that's how it's always been, but suddenly Bran is contacting him in another way. Yes, there's the direwolf link, but he's contacting him in another way. So he sniffed, this is Jon as Ghost, he sniffed at the bark, smelled wolf and tree and boy. But behind that, there were other scents, the rich brown smell of warm earth and the hard grey smell of stone, and something else, something terrible. Death, he knew. He was smelling death. He cringed back, his hair bristling, and bared his fangs. Now, Bran at this time, don't forget, is in the crypts. Don't be afraid. I like it in the dark. No one can see you, but you can see them. But first, you have to open your eyes. See? Like this. And the tree reached down and touched him. And suddenly, he was back in the mountains, his paws sunk deep in a drift of snow as he stood upon the edge of a great precipice. So this seems to be John having a dream when he's being ghost, and Bran contacting him through that, appearing as a weirwood. We get a little bit later Bran thinking about these kinds of things, and we read that he, Bran, could reach Summer whenever he wanted, and once they had even touched Ghost and talked to John, though maybe he had only dreamed that. So that's what's going on here. As I say, it's a bit of a long read, but I think it's a fascinating one because it's showing this, the connection is there between John and Bran, but Bran is here appearing as a weirwood, and he's also trying to do, he doesn't really understand what he's trying to do, but he's trying to do what was done to him to kind of like open up John's magic, which doesn't seem to work, but who knows. So that's the bit you were talking about, saying that, asking basically whether this means that Bran will play a role in Jon's resurrection or his crypt dreams. Now, I completely get the idea of why you might think that that's the case. However, I think this is just Bran not really knowing what he's doing. Jojen is really worried and concerned about all of this time that Bran is spending over skin changing into Summer, because he knows a bit, but he doesn't know how to help him, how to talk to him about it. He's not a green seer, he's not a skin changer, he doesn't get all of it, he just gets the green dreams. But this seems to be Bran just trying to sort of tell Jon about part of what his own experience had been about becoming this three-eyed crow, about gaining this extra bit of power, and Jon kind of resists, or doesn't really do anything about it. It has to be said. Now, does any of that mean then that Bran's going to play a role in Jon returning from the dead? Personally, I think no. I don't think there's a hint of that. I think that Bloodraven has been spending his time skin changing into Ghost, and he therefore has a way in, and probably will be able to push Jon out of Ghost at the appropriate moment. I think, if I had to guess, that's probably the best. Once Jon's body gets thawed out, then Bloodraven pushes Jon out of Ghost and back into his own body. Let's go to a question from Cathrine Fursith saying, "Hi Robert, there's a lot of talk about Targaryens having dragon blood. And in one of the first Bran chapters in Clash of Kings, Old Man is referred to having said that Starks have wolf's blood. This isn't often referred to in our discussions, but what does it mean? In the same chapter, Bran thinks a lot about talking to wolves and understanding their language, and all of Winterfell is trying to understand why Shaggy Dog and Summer are howling, what they're saying, in effect. Do you think there is something to this line about Starks and wolf's blood? And what will it mean for Bran's story going forward?" So, what is it special between Starks and wolves? Well, we're not told the whole history here. There's a clear implication is that Starks and direwolves have not always had this bond. This seems to be a new thing for this generation. There's no hint that Ned or his father's father had this kind of connection to a direwolf in particular. But clearly, because the direwolves hadn't been seen for whatever it was, 300 years or whatever it was that we're told, that they'd not been south of the wall. So this seems to be slightly different to the dragon. You'd have thought if every single Stark could bond with a direwolf, you'd have thought they probably would have made sure that they had direwolves around. But they don't. But still, there is clearly a link between the Starks and the direwolves that we've not yet been told. Maybe we never will. But I think George R. R. Martin, what he's definitely doing is playing up this echo between the Starks and the Targaryens, is that they've got this animal that they have this kind of bond with. And this is then their kind of sigil. This is how they identify themselves. We have the dragon blood, we have the wolf blood. And both of those, they have their kind of connections. This idea, the wolf blood, the blood of the wolf is like, hot-headed. And Brandon Stark, Ned's brother, was told he apparently had this, and so also you get someone like Viserys, Daenerys's brother, who often talking about the blood of the dragon, and you don't want to anger the dragon and things like that. So the echoes are being set up from very early on, and this will probably play out in the story with Jon and Dany, whenever they do meet, finding a connection that perhaps they didn't realize before, because I think there's no doubt that Dany, if she saw Jon with this massive direwolf and seeing that they've got some kind of link going on, that will mean something to her in a way that when Jon sees Dany with this massive dragon and they've clearly got some kind of bond, he will kind of understand a bit about what's going on there. So there's already a kind of a simpatico thing going on. So yeah, we've not been told all the details, but that's what we've got. It's ice and fire, but ice and fire in this original conception from the poem, the Robert Frost poem, there's the whole point is they're quite kind of similar in effect, is that they feel like opposites, but they're actually they do the same thing. So yeah, George R. R. Martin is setting this up, and was setting this up from very early, that there are links here where we might see the big differences. And just as a by the by, that makes sense of there being Starks and Targaryens in the past that had these perhaps unlikely alliances. Craig Stark and Jace, they seem to have got along really well. So you might expect the Starks and the Targaryens not to get along, but they often do. Let's go to oh yeah, and Andrew Kay and Agree Weirwood talking about statues coming to life. There are statues of direwolves in the Winterfell crypts that I think will come to life. Stone coming to life. And what is it that clearly seems to be a part of this Azor Ahai prophecy that Melisandre keeps going on, is stone dragons coming to life. There's the links are being made across all the time by George R. Martin. Corvus Corax saying, "Good evening, Robert and Dan. My question is, what reason do you think Bran will have for leaving the cave? An attack by the others, disgust with all of Bloodraven's machinations, or will he learn all he needs to?" Yeah, so this is a fun question. So, will he learn all he needs to? I mean, I don't think. I mean, he's 9. I don't think he's going to be in this position where he's going, "What? That's it. Everything I know. That there's nothing more to do." I don't think we're going to reach that point. He might think, "Oh, I now understand this. You've told me about going through the weirwood trees. Yeah, I get that. You told me about skin changing. I get that." He may get to a point where he's like, "Oh, I've been told that I can figure out the rest for myself." That's entirely possible. But I don't think we're going to have this kind of like, "Yep, I think I've finished my course here in how to be a tree wizard, and here's his certificate," anything along those lines. Will he leave because of disgust at what Bloodraven's machinations are? I suspect not. As I say, I don't think that Bran is going to get a wake-up call about sort of the morality of what he does until unless and until he sees what happens with Hodor, because nobody's ever sat and nobody really understands what he's doing half the time. He's skin changing into Hodor all the time in those last couple of chapters, and people just don't know. Uh, he's getting away with stuff. When we talk about the him going into the Weirwood network and seeing out through the eyes of the Winterfell Weirwood tree and the visions that we've talked about already, the one of the Brandon Stark way back in time, he did that probably without anyone knowing. He did one go at it, saw his father. They had a little conversation with Bloodraven. Bloodraven goes, "Oh, I'm a little bit tired now. We'll pick this up tomorrow." Bran goes back, and as he's lying there, he just like slips back into having a look out through some weird eyes. So he does all this stuff without consulting anyone, and he needs something to kind of jolt him into thinking about the ethics of what he's up to. So that's that, and then that kind of leaves the attack. And as I kind of said a little bit earlier, the attack or an attack does tally with what we know about Hodor, because George R. Martin has said with Hodor, he is holding the door, not just as in literally physically holding a door, but holding a doorway in the way that you might direct somebody to make sure nobody comes through. So if that's the case, that means that there are people trying to get at Bran as Bran is escaping, which seems to imply an attack. So I wouldn't put it past Bran to think that he has learnt, a good amount of what he needs to learn from there. But I think that the actual prompt, the catalyst for him going, will be an attack. The only other option is that I can think of off the top of my head, I have to say, is Maura, who I think will discover what happened to Jojen, and perhaps her disgust might make her try to take Bran away. And it could be then that it's not the others trying to stop them escaping. This is the children of the forest who don't want Bran going, because all of this effort with Bloodraven has been to get Bran all the way up there. And now what? He's just going to disappear? No, they're going to try and stop him. It's possible. Let's go to question. Random Dimitri, yes, I did a proper mock yawn. Not an actual yawn. I'm sure I have done some actual yawns on this stream. I usually do, but this time it was a mock yawn. Nole Dragon saying, before I ask questions, a quick reminder to plug your other channels and merch store. Thank you very much. I shall do that. Merch is down there somewhere. Look at it. Other and buy if you want to. That would be lovely. Other channels. Let me rattle through the other channels I've got. So if you're on YouTube right now, you're watching this on IDG Live. IDG Live is these live streams plus a few random other things, short form stuff, random things that I would do appear on here. The main videos appear on the main Indie Geek channel. If you fall asleep to these videos, I do not take offense. I have leaned into this. Plenty of people fall asleep listening to these. That is fine. I've created a separate channel devoted to that. It's called In Deep Sleep, which I think is a wonderful title. Many people suggested this to me before I finally went with it. But yeah, I did these live streams as well as some other things I do. I put them as a long form video. The audio lasts 2-3 hours, whatever it is, and then that audio fades, and you've just got some soothing background noises and things, and the whole video goes on for 8 hours with no adverts in the middle. So that's the idea, is if you do go to sleep to these, then you don't have to worry about adverts or anything like that. You just put that on. There might be some adverts right at the very beginning or right at the very end, but in that 8 hour chunk, no. So that's the other term. What else? Oh, the well-told tale. If you like classic science fiction and fantasy stories, I audio narrate stuff on the well-told tale. We're working our way through Frankenstein at the moment. I think episode 3. I've certainly recorded episode 3. I think that might have just come out. So do go and check that out. Great story. We've also got some other great stories from Conan stories, H.G. Wells stories, H.P. Lovecraft stories, all of that kind of stuff's up there. And what else should I say? If you enjoy watching the videos, you find it easier. Spotify, they're going up on Facebook now. So yeah, check it out all over the place. Thank you, Lorelei, for reminding me. I always forget to do that. Um, But your question was, I feel much like Nymeria's super pack, Bran's magic abilities must play a significant role in the story going forward. Could you speculate on what form that might take? Are there hints regarding the future impact of Bran's magic? Personally, I think it would be cool if he walked a dragon. Another question just for fun. How do you think a tree wizard compares to a Time Lord? Well, on that question, a tree wizard stays where they are, but kind of projects themselves out through green dreams or through skin changing or through looking through the eyes of a weirwood tree, but their physical body remains there. The Time Lord gets in their TARDIS and goes somewhere. So that's the big difference between them. The Time Lord doesn't get the green dreams or do the skin changing, obviously, either. They're both cool, but those are the differences. As for your sort of broader question, what role might he take his magic take? I think I've covered that off in previous questions. I will just quickly pick up on though you ask about walking into a dragon. This was a very popular question for quite some time within the Song of Ice and Fire fandom, built on the original thought of you won't be able to walk again, but you will be able to fly, which isn't just a throwaway comment. This was something that kept Bran going for a long time. And Bloodraven, when he finally gets to Bloodraven and he kind of like confronts him with this, and Bloodraven goes, "Oh yeah, I'll show you how to fly. Look, here's some birds up in the sky. You can skin change into them." So that's the first answer. Is that Bloodraven has shown him, yes, you can fly. Bran does now fly. He's not just skin changing into summer anymore. He can skin change into birds. Hodor, obviously, he's getting kind of powerful at this. The second point is that you'll be able to fly. Flight is a metaphor for magic here, obviously. So him being able to fly is there, but it does leave open this possibility of skin changing into a dragon. Might he do it? I mean, I can't rule it out, I have to say. But I think we're too far away from the point at which we say, why would Bran do that if he has the power? A dragon would be a huge thing for him physically as well as sort of literally for him to be able to skin change into. They appear to be a different form. They're a magical beast, so a different form of beast in some way. I'm not saying no, but at the moment I think Dany and Drogon have got that link. I think Jon's going to be getting a link with the Rhaegal, and then we get the third one that my best guess is Euron, but I don't think we're looking at Bran skin changing into a dragon, but I can't rule it out. Let's go to Corvus Corax saying, "Good evening, Robert, Dan, and all. My question today is, what reason do you think Bran will have for leaving the couch?" I did that one already. Apologies. The Maura Lee saying, Bran eventually becomes king of Westeros. Before that, he had a role in defeating the Night King. What will be his role regarding the others, etc. I think I've already answered that bit. And who do you think will eventually become Warden of the North if it ends up not being Sansa? So Stark makes sense. We don't know exactly how the world is going to look like after it has almost certainly been devastated by the others and by the dragons and by the Dothraki and by several years of civil war. But now it appears likely that Sansa will survive because George R. R. Martin has hinted it. Then she is the most likely Lady of Winterfell, I think. I don't think she will want to go down to King's Landing. I think she'll want to stay in Winterfell. I think that we mostly think that Rickon will not survive. We mostly think Bran will become king. We mostly think that Jon is not going to want it and is probably going to head off north of the wall. And we mostly think that Arya is also not going to want it. So the only Stark around who is going to want this is Sansa. So it kind of makes sense there. I do wonder, and it's hard trying to get into George R. R. Martin's mind on these kinds of things, but I do wonder whether this is actually a case of him seeing on the TV show the arc for Sansa, which took her around to a position where actually I thought on the TV show that was the only logical place for her to end up as a character arc. She starts off in Winterfell, not wanting to be in Winterfell, this kind of rose-tinted glasses look at the rest of the world. She has to grow up and learn, and as she's growing up and learning down in the south, she's realizing more and more how the place that she wants to be is this place of safety, which actually is Winterfell. It's returning back to where she was before, and she needs to be in a place where she cannot be used and abused by all these powerful men and women that she has come into contact with over her story, and so she will want to be in charge, not just sitting somewhere comfortably in Winterfell. That character arc worked, I think, well in the TV show. And incidentally, Sophie Turner has also said that she liked her ending for her character, and she thinks she's obviously talked to the other actors involved. She thinks that she's maybe not alone in this, but that's quite rare among the actors. The implication was among the actors in Game of Thrones is that she felt that was a satisfying end for her character, and I feel that is a satisfying end roughly for her character in the books, and I suspect that is something of what went into George R. R. Martin's change of heart here too. He does change his mind as he is thinking through characters about what is going to happen to them in the story. And I think him being shown where that character arc ended and then getting the feelings of, yeah, that actually kind of makes sense, I think means that whereas his initial thought was that he was going to kill off Sansa, actually he's thought, well, I think there's a more satisfying ending here in a different way. So I think that was what was going on with Sansa, which is a very long way around of getting to the point of saying that if Bran does end up as king, I think the only obvious answer to who would be Lord or Lady of Winterfell is Sansa. Relaxed like a cat, saying, "Hi, Robert. Hope all is well. Marking season is now over, so I can dream of spring." Since George R. R. Martin's has shown that the TV series can influence his writing of the story, as with Sansa, as we were talking, do you still think that it's likely that he'll diverge from Bran being king? If he is crowned as a creature that's part of the Weirwood network, there's something quite ominous about him. If he's crowned as a human, surely there are more deserving potential monarchs. Also, the high-ups in my university are suspending most of its humanities courses, which includes the teaching of the books germane to the well-told tale. Are you able to promote the petition against this? No worries if not. Well, in terms of the petition, I obviously don't know any other background history, so I can't endorse anything in particular there. But I do obviously like books, and so my instinct is always to say we should be teaching more about books. If you, I don't know if you're there in the chat. If you're there in the chat, feel free to drop something in the live chat. If you're watching this back a bit later, feel free to drop something down. You sent a link, but put a link down in the comments below, and then please do check it out and sign up if you agree with it. That would be great. So I think in terms of sort of your question, he's not going to be, I think, made king on the basis of the fact that he is turning into a weird half-human tree wizard. I don't think that's the basis of it. I think that it will be the fact that he is the Stark heir, the person who is, and when I say the Stark heir, after Ned died, the heir was Robb. Robb's heir should have been Bran, and it's only not Bran because everybody thinks that Bran's dead. So he is effectively going to be Warden of the North. Whenever they come into this great council or whatever it is that they have, he will effectively already be Warden of the North. And he could name Sansa as his heir and then become king. So I think he would have to be crowned as a human, and only some people will know about what's really going on with him. Now, just in terms of the acting, because a number of people have sort of picked up on this. Yeah, I agree completely with a couple of people who said, Isaac Kemp said, right, I am 100% sure was given directions to act in a kind of very blank-faced way. He's no longer the person he used to be. And I think he clearly did that. So kudos to him. But I think that was the showrunners trying to show us that something within Bran has changed. George R. R. Martin does not have to do that because we can have POVs from Bran's perspective. And so we can see that Bran has changed. But other people may not know that. So he doesn't have to have Bran act as weird as he did on the TV show. He can just have us see what Bran is like from his POV. Dadiga, love the channel. Thank you. I always appreciate your insights. That's very kind. What is something about Bran that you feel is not discussed enough in the fandom, given your reading? It's not discussed enough is a good question, because it's quite a hard one to think of off the top of your head. What is not discussed enough? So I'll say one thing which I've mentioned a few times here because I think it's important, which is his age. And another thing which I've mentioned a few times here because I think it's important is the fact that he's not been trained until this point. Those things I think are critical to understanding book Bran. The other thing which hasn't come up in any of the questions here so far, but anytime I've previously talked about Bran, is I think it's a really interesting one, which is this question of whether Bran actually is the person that Jojen saw in his vision. Because Jojen didn't get he came up looking for this person, but he didn't get a green dream of a picture of Bran or the name Bran. He got an image of a winged wolf being held down by chains. And some people have speculated that perhaps it's actually Rickon. Rickon does seem incredibly powerful as a sort of a proto green seer. We don't know the extent of Rickon's powers. He certainly has got a very strong bond with shaggy dog, his direwolf. So yeah, I think that would be something which I still find fascinating just to think about, and does come up a huge amount. Perhaps could be discussed a bit more. Is it actually Bran that Jojen was going to, and does this matter? Because this ties into what we were talking about ages ago in this stream, which is this predetermination kind of idea. Did it have to be Bran, or was it just a powerful Greenseer? SGH, what if there's a great council and every lord votes for themselves for the Iron Throne, except for Jaime Lannister, who votes for Bran? Well, it's an interesting idea. First of all, we're having to assume that Jaime survives. I'm not sure he will. I think that the foreshadowing is there that he will die at the same time as Cersei. Probably not from falling masonry, but I think the foreshadowing is there that the two of them will die at the same time. Who the others voting for themselves? I mean, I don't know. The problem is we don't know exactly how the voting rules of the Great Council operate, because we've not actually seen one firsthand. We've just read about them in the histories, and the maesters, they run them. And I think that they're quite happy for people not to look too closely about how these things operate. So is it one vote per lord, one vote per area? It's not entirely clear, but I think it seems, or do you get weighted by how important or powerful your house is? It's not one vote we had when Viserys I was made king. We're told that was 90% in his favor, and we're told the houses which were against, which seemed to imply that it was something closer to one house, one vote, though surely like a teeny tiny little house doesn't get the same as one of the Lords Paramount, but we're not sure. The question then, I suppose, is if each of the areas just wanted their lord to be king, what then? To which I would say, I suspect a lot of the areas will not have an obvious lord at that moment in time. I think the Westerlands may well not have an obvious lord, and if they did, it would probably be Tyrion, and Tyrion probably doesn't have the full support of the Westerlands. The Vale of Arryn has been rent asunder over the last few years. Who's going to be the Lord then? Well, is it Harry Harding? I'm just not entirely sure. I think that it's not it. Each of the different and what's going to go on in the Iron Islands? Will they have another King's Moot? Will the new king of the Seven Kingdoms decide that they don't actually want a King's Moot, because that implies that they're going to have a king? So I don't know. I don't think it's going to be that straightforward. Zero saying, when Bran went north of the wall, his companions talked him out of going to Castle Black to see Jon. As parallel, when he comes south of the wall, do you think his companions will talk him into going to Greywater Watch or the God's Eye Lake to complete his training? He would certainly want to go to Winterfell, but that wouldn't help him with his training if there's no one there to teach him. Yeah, I mean, I understand the thinking. I don't think at that point it's going to be about completing training. It's going to be about confronting the others. I think we will start to learn, particularly if there is anything to this idea about that they made the link that allowed them to cross the barrier, the magical barrier into Bloodraven's cave. That may therefore mean that they might be able to cross over the wall. If any of that happens, then we're in a situation where we're just running out of time. And Bran goes to Winterfell to sort out defences, not to complete his training down in Greywater Watch. That's certainly also, I think, George R. Martin's original plan when he had this 5-year gap envisaged. Where Bran was going to be for that 5-year gap was Bloodraven's cave, and doing all of his learning there so that he doesn't have to go back and do it later. Dominic Vaughan. Hi, Robert. Hope you and Dan are well. A few quick questions. How do you see Bran's warging abilities expanding as he goes into wizardry? I.e., will he be able to mass warg animals, humans or wights? Not sure if that would be possible. Well, on that, yeah, I mean, the hints are perhaps he can, or would be able to. Certainly, the hints are that Bloodraven might have been able to walk into a number of things at one time. The TV show certainly seemed to show this whole flock of birds going. The implication Bran was in all of them. So you can certainly have a bond with more than one animal at a time. Faramir Sixskins definitely did. Being inside more than one animal at a time, who knows? As for wights, I tend to think probably not, because this seems to be a different type of power, or the inverse of the power. Pardon me. So skin changers can go into an animal, a live animal, and control them. Then the others can go into a dead animal and control them. So that seems to be the difference. We've never seen a dead animal be skin changed into, that I can think of anyway. And so that seems to be a different power. Waking of the Giants. Will his old god's magic and powers have anything to do with the waking of the giants from the earth? Pardon me, sorry. About the resurrected starts and about the resurrected starts in the Winterfell crypts. So the waking of the giants, I think, is usually connected with the Horn of Winter. That's the thing. There are two legends about what the Horn of Winter can do. One is bring down the wall. The other one is raise giants from the earth. Now, my working theory is that the giants from the earth are the statues in the Winterfell crypts, and so you blow the Horn of Winter, and they can come to life. So, is Bran going to play a part in that? I don't think he's going to be one blowing the horn, but it's entirely possible that he might be part of understanding why the horn does not seem to work at the moment. Because it doesn't. Jon gets this horn, which he Ghost discovers in this cache with all the dragon glass, clearly a gift from Bloodraven. And he blows it, and he thinks, oh, this is broken. Which is an interesting word to use, because it's just a horn, and he can't see anything wrong in it. So he's thinking, well, why does he think it's breaking? He doesn't think it doesn't work. This is a rubbish horn, or I'm not very good at blowing horns. He thinks it's a broken horn. So that immediately ties into a huge amount of other bits of broken imagery that we have. Brandon the Breaker was the King of Winter at the time. And obviously now we have Bran the Broken. So is he going to play a role? Maybe he will go back in time and see what happened to break it. And then he will be able to say how it can be unbroken and used again. So yeah, just as an aside here, Bloodraven, I said this was clearly a gift from Bloodraven. Ghost ran off and found this cache of dragonglass and the Horn of Winter. The clear implication is that this was Bloodraven who went in and took control of Ghost. I do wonder whether this might also be part of the reason why Jon hasn't, for literary reasons rather than in-world reasons, why George R. R. Martin hasn't had John explore more strongly the link that he has, the skin changing link he has got with Ghost. So what I mean by that is, if John goes into Ghost, probably he'll be able to tell that Bloodraven had been already there, and perhaps we don't wish to find that out yet, because that would be an important part in showing that Bloodraven is manipulating events behind the scenes, which is information that George Martin might want to bring out later. So it's possible, from, as I say, from a military perspective. Kelly Faunt's saying, could it be that the horn is perfectly fine and it isn't just meant for John? It's possible. Sam also tried it. You do have to ask, though, who it is meant for. Maybe Bran, as you say, maybe he is the one. When I was doing my videos on this ages ago, I tried to work out, well, who should be. If George R. R. Martin likes this idea of like things echoing down through time, who should be the person who can do this? And I came up with, I think there's 4 different possibilities. The Lord of Winterfell could, the King of Winter. Maybe it was whoever that is. John will be, probably at some point, he will be the Lord of Winterfell. He has been, by Robb's will, he's already been made his heir, and Robb's dead, and so he's been legitimized, and so John, by many different sort of legal interpretations, is currently the Lord of Winterfell. So that's the first option. The second option is perhaps the King Beyond the Wall, because Joramun apparently used it. And who is the King Beyond the Wall? Well, it's not Mance Rayder really anymore, because everyone thinks he's dead. So who are the wildlings following? At the moment, John. So he is acting as the King Beyond the Wall. Or maybe it's the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. They're sounding the horn to warn people. John's the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. So the other person, you could say, well, potentially this could be the prince that was promised / Azor Ahai reborn / the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. Again, you could interpret that as John. So my kind of assessment of which job titles kind of fit with being the right person to blow this, John kind of fits into all of them. Let's go to a question from Jerry Invincible. I'm interested in Bran's personality and sense of self as he becomes more connected to the network. I found the show depiction a bit unnerving. He seemed to become almost robotic, like Data in Star Trek. Able to acknowledge his name, but calm and unemotional to the point that he seemed barely human. This is not a criticism, as we've already said of Isaac Hempstead Wright. I'm sure he was directed to do it like that. But it was one of the aspects I struggled with the most in terms of the show ending. Just the idea that someone with so little charisma and energy would ever be able to lead in a place where personality and relationships are so important. Do you think this is a show-only depiction, or does hooking yourself up to the network lose a big part of yourself? Can we take any lessons from Bloodraven in how Bran might turn out in the books? Well, yeah, so this is good. I've covered a reasonable amount of this already, but let's just go with the Bloodraven example here, because I think this is quite an important one. So Bloodraven, when Bran meets him, Bloodraven clearly is not, when I say he's not all there, that's probably not the right way. He recognizes who he is. He has a sense of self. He talks about, there was a brother I loved, etc. And he happily talked about his own personal relationships and things like that, and what name he had. But it is always in this kind of past sense, because he has for decades now been stuck in that weirwood throne with roots going through him. And whereas he does seem to have parts of his own personality, from what we understand of his personality from before, are still very much there. He also he he seems a bit tired. Um, he's he happily teaches stuff, but he's not. He sort of pauses every now and then and says, "Right, Bran, come back tomorrow." You have to ask, is that just because he's getting old? Because he is getting very old. But also, probably, you look at the other children of the forest who are hooked up to the Weirwood network, who are presumably older greenseers in some way, shape, or form. And when they're described, they're also just like kind of these kind of emaciated figures, just sort of like looking through their eyes. They're still there, but they're being sucked up into the Weirwood network, as it were. So the implication is that that took time, and it also took them staying where they are so they could be physically hooked up there. Bran is not going to have the time. We've probably only got a couple of years left for him, and he's probably not going to be literally hooked up to a weirwood tree. In fact, that bit when he went and looked through the eyes of the weirwood tree in the books, he's not even holding onto a weirwood tree then. He just goes back and then just kind of slips into it. In the same way that he doesn't have to be holding on to Summer or to Hodor in order to skin change into them, he just does it. So forget the kind of the thing in the TV show when he's kind of reaching out. There's a weirwood tree. I've got a chance to reconnect, and he reach it. That doesn't seem to be the case. Now he's had the weirwood paste. He seems to be very much self-sufficient in this. He doesn't have to be hooked up and holding onto it, which means that probably the reasoning behind why he might be less himself is diminished. So I don't think he needs to be like that. The only thing potentially is what happened at the very end of the period in Bloodraven's Cave on the TV show was Bloodraven seems to the bad guys are here. I just need to download information into you now. I don't think that needs to happen in the books because Bran can access the Weirwood network from elsewhere. But perhaps there's something we don't know yet. We always have to be honest about this. Magic, George R. R. Martin will tell us more about magic every single day. He likes us not to understand exactly how the magic system works. So we shouldn't think that we understand it all. Perhaps he will. Perhaps he will get to that kind of, but I would agree with you that then makes it harder to understand how he would, as a human, be crowned. Let's go to those are the end of my questions about Bran specifically. Feel free to drop some more into the chat. I will answer a few more as we go along. I've got some other questions, as I often do, from my patrons, so I shall quickly go through them. Rabbi Mitra, I think I saw you in the chat a moment ago, saying, salutations, I hope you're well and excited for the new season with Michael Carrick at the wheel. Absolutely. My fellow patrons have a lot of questions on Bran, so I'll save mine for Lord of the Rings and the stage play. So Lord of the Rings, first of all. I love the recent video, he says, about dragons. I did do one, and how you connected to Tolkien's Seventh Age. You mentioned that dragons surviving into the fourth, fifth ages is Tolkien's twist on why our world has myths about dragons all across. Yeah, so very high level. Tolkien is very clear that in his world, dragons survived. Smaug was not the last dragon. Dragons did survive, but not in the same kind of scale or power as they used to have. And that is why, by implication, given that Middle-earth is our Earth, but in a different stage of imagination, that is how it has worked its way through, with dragons being a key part in the legends in many parts of this world. So that's where Tolkien's mind went on this. So Rabbi is saying, do you believe Thranduil's folk and the last of the woodland realm fading in the fourth or fifth age is the reason why elf myths and legends are present in our current world? And can anyone in the chat think of other myths or legends in the current world that could be born out of surviving species from Tolkien's fourth age? Maybe skin changers, Beornings. Yeah, so I mean, this is the idea that Tolkien basically has, is that the third age of Middle Earth is the bit we know about with the story of the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit a bit earlier, and so on. The fourth age is the dominion of man. So the magicy stuff kind of goes. We know the elves, they get on the boats and they sail west. The dwarves dig deeper. The orcs have largely wiped out. And so the Balrog is gone. All of these big magical things kind of faded, so humanity has its moment to shine. But there are some things that linger. The dragons in the Withered Heath far off to the north. Some elves do stay, but they just kind of fade. Are there other things? Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see. So the elves fading and other things fading, you could certainly think echoes of ghostly things in our tales in this world. Um, uh, but yeah, let me know in the chat if you think of it. The skin changes Beornings thing. Absolutely. If you're looking for these kinds of ideas, this idea of the Beornings, people who can turn into bears and the like, that does seem to be quite like our werewolf myths. But you also asked about the stage play. The Game of Thrones stage play, saying, what has my head spinning over the past few weeks is the size of the cross stage. While booking tickets, I didn't realise how much space that stage will be taking up in the whole theatre, which really puts a creative restriction on the choreography of the play. How do you think they will portray various events surrounding in 281 AC surrounding the Mad King? I ask because this stage could be the stage could be the reason why we don't see any scene of the Isle of Faces. Similarly, if we're getting a 15-minute sequence in Robert's Rebellion, I can see the four ends of the cross stage showing battles across the Vale, Stony Septs, Riverlands, and Stormlands, whilst the centre could be Aerys' perspective from King's Landing. Right. So I love the thinking here. This is all good. What I would say, I'd say a few things here. The first is the stage is big. It's, I mean, it's not the biggest theatre in the world, but it is a big theatre with a big stage, and they're making the stage bigger. It is, I did a quick Google, it is, at the moment, it's like 15 meters wide, and it kind of projects out 15 meters into the audience. That's its standard. But they're extending it. So it goes all the way out and all the way across. And also you've got extra bits that in any big theatre, the stage it's not just from where the front curtain goes, it extends quite a way out. So we're talking really quite big. So I would suggest, and the second thing I would say is that the stage management there is unbelievable. To the point where I would say, please stop thinking about restrictions on what they can do. I have seen in that theatre and other things the Royal Shakespeare Company have done, the entire stage tilting at an angle of 45 degrees. The closing scene of Hamlet, actually, the recent Hamlet they did there at that very theatre. I've seen 3-4-story buildings emerge up out of the stage. I've seen the entire stage take on the feel of an ocean. The things they can do with this are pretty astonishing. So I wouldn't personally look at the restrictions on what might possibly happen on the stage. I would say, what changes have they made, and what might that imply about what they might want to do? The changes that they've made are they've taken seats out and they've expanded the stage to make it this kind of cross shape, which I think means they've got to have things sort of going across like that. So I think that's the tourney. That's the only bit I'm willing to sort of say pretty certainly we're going to have the tourney. We will have puppetry, and the puppetry I'm saying is next level. Jousting. So yeah, I would encourage you not to think about the restrictions, but think about the possibilities. The other thing that I would say, which I noticed more, thought about more this week, is that yes, the play is going to be focused in on the tourney at Harrenhal, but it's not just about the tourney at Harrenhal. One line there that we've got is that it will be spanning the final years before the events of the novels. So if you just took that on its own, the final years before the events of the novels could take you into Robert's Rebellion, beyond Robert's Rebellion. Who knows where the appropriate point for the end point for the Mad King? Perhaps it's the end point for the Mad King. The end point for the Mad King play. Are they going to just do a little thing about what happens in the tourney at Harrenhal, or are they focusing it in on this character of the Mad King? In which case, perhaps we need to see his end point in some way. In which case, we might need to see the rebellion. I don't know. I have no inside information on this at all. So yeah, I'm still very excited. It should be fantastic. Yes, and if you're wanting to go agree, we would thank you very much for putting a link to that in the live chat. And then last question from my patrons, Walla Witzer, saying, "Hello, Robert. I would love to hear your thoughts on Peter Jackson's comments about his negotiations with the Tolkien estate. It appears it is finally possible to tap into Tolkien's other written materials, like the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, History of Middle-earth. I have dreamed about seeing these stories adapted since the Lord of the Rings films came out." And then you sort of mention a few excellent things like Turin and Glaurung and Fingolfin's duel with Morgoth, etc. So what do I think? Well, for those who've missed this, and it's entirely understandable to miss this. Oh, before I forget, we have had confirmation, by the way, of a new open world RPG, Middle-earth based, which is being developed by Warhorse. I don't know their full name, but the team is a video game team who are behind Kingdom Come Deliverance and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which are medieval open world and very good video games. So I'm very excited about this. We have very little information so far, but it could well be good. But to return to the Peter Jackson thing, yeah, he got an honorary Palme d'Or, I think it was, this week. And so he's been doing a lot of interviews around that. And one of the things that he said is that he has been talking to the Tolkien estate, he and Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers, I think, own New Line, which obviously were the people who did the Lord of the Rings films, which is Peter Jackson's department. They've been talking to the Tolkien estate about the possibility of getting the rights to other Tolkien things, and he name-checked both the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales. Now, the Tolkien rights, I should probably say, are some of the most complicated rights out there in terms of who owns the rights to do what. And when I say they're complicated, it's not just like, oh, they're with a lot of different people that you would think. I've talked to quite a lot of people sort of in the wider Tolkien world. People that you would expect to know who has the rights to produce what are still a little bit murky on it. This is quite complicated. Tolkien sold off, at the very high level, he sold off the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit while he was alive, back near the end of his life. He completely understandably decided, you know what, no idea how long this is going to last. I can at the very least guarantee that my family are are okay. They've got the money to going forward from My Life's Work. So he did that, but they kept back the rights to his wider work, which at the time was unpublished. And it was only published after his death when his son Christopher Tolkien did an epic job as editor of bringing this all together, which is where we get the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, History of Middle-earth, which is a whole series of books. Now, the rights to that lot of stuff has never been sold. So that has stayed with the Tolkien estate, and it seems pretty clear. Peter Jackson basically said this. It seems pretty clear that Christopher Tolkien did not want to sell it. He was, like his father, it has to be said, not that keen on adaptations. And whereas there are some adaptations that he did like. I will give another shout out here to the 1980s BBC radio full-cast adaptation that Christopher Tolkien actively cleared the scripts for. That's as good an adaptation as you're going to get, or a good and close an adaptation as you're going to get of The Lord of the Rings, and it is excellent. But broadly speaking, he wasn't a big fan of adaptations, and so the rights were never sold. He very sadly died 2 or 3 years ago, and the next generation of Tolkiens, who are now their holders of the Tolkien estate, seem more willing to discuss this. So that's the situation. All rights currently for those things are residing with the Tolkien estate. The right to do things connected with that, as I say, it gets a bit mucky. The reason why Amazon can do things in the Second Age, they've not got the rights to the Silmarillion. They do have the rights to the appendices to the Lord of the Rings. The appendices being a cut down version, effectively, of what the Silmarillion would be. So, what does all this mean? Well, firstly, this is not just Peter Jackson and Warner Brothers talking to the Tolkien estate about this. This will be more than one company. Expect at some point for us to hear other companies are in negotiations. What I think this does mean is that we will, at some point, I think probably those rights will be sold in some way, shape, or form, whether that's to make films, whether that's to make TV shows, who knows? And we don't know who they will be sold to. But I think we are now heading towards a situation where it is looking likely where we will get some of those great older stories out there, adapted in some way, shape, or form. Personally, a lot of the Silmarillion, I think, would work better. So there are some really good animations that you can do nowadays that I think, whereas previously when it was just very 2D stuff, it didn't really work. I think now we could probably make a good effort at a lot of the Silmarillion. So yeah, I think it's going to happen. I'm cautiously excited. I think, and I'd be fascinated to know what people here think. Let me know in the comments. But I tweeted about this when the news came out, and I have to say, a large number of people kind of replied to me and to others saying, well, yeah, okay, if Peter Jackson gets it, that's fine. But there are other people who could do this. He's had his shot. He did really well with the main Lord of the Rings films, perhaps less well with the Hobbit films, the War of the Rohirrim. Maybe it's time for somebody else to have a different vision for this. So I'd love to know what you think. Are you excited? Would you want someone else to be doing this? I don't know. Okay, that I think is that in terms of questions from my patrons. Let's have a quick flick through the questions in the chat. Weirwood saying Stephen Colbert. Yeah, in case you missed this, Stephen Colbert, who's an American chat show host and Tolkien aficionado, he's doing the second of this latest batch of I'm calling them Peter Jackson films. Peter Jackson is not writing them or directing or anything like that, but he's sort of executive producing them. The first is The Hunt for Gollum, which is going to be run by Andy Serkis. The second is I don't know if it's got a name really yet, but it is attempting to, in some way, cover the 4 or so chapters in the Fellowship of the Ring that were not included in the Peter Jackson films. So, the Old Forest, a lot of the walking through the Shire, the Old Forest, Tom Bombadil, the Barrow Downs, Barrow Whites, that bit there, which would be great if they can do that. So Stephen Colbert is co-writing that film. I'm cautiously optimistic about that, actually. I mean, I can't pretend to know huge amounts about his other writing credits, but from what I've seen, he does seem to be a genuine, knowledgeable fan. So that's a good start. Bielemeier saying, "Would love your thoughts on the idea that Christopher's wishes were to not have those rights ever sold." I mean, I don't want to put words into his mouth. I don't think that he wanted to sell them himself. I don't know whether he would have left any instructions for the next generation. I have to admit, I don't know. Fall of Gondolin could be Glorfindel's debut. Yeah, that would be great. Glorfindel, justice for Glorfindel. He should definitely be making an appearance. Bielemeier also suggesting that Amazon cutting back from further adaptations is a key indicator around them backing out of the current rights agreement for TV shows. So Amazon had the right to make TV shows based on the Lord of the Rings and the appendices, not just the Rings of Power. They had the right to make other shows. They've shown no indication of wanting to do that. So the implication, I think, has to be that they're going to finish the Rings of Power. I'm pretty certain about that, but they've given no indication of wanting to do more. Let's he's flicking through JARM over on Facebook saying hello. Great to see people there on Facebook as well. And sort of flicking back a little bit earlier, get connections across to the stage play. Yes, please do go and check that out. Okay. Andrew Case saying Simon Tolkien seems more lax on adaptations per some of his comments. That worries me a bit. Tolkien projects need very high standards. Yes, so I don't think that the adaptation, once the rights have been sold, then the Tolkien estate, and I suppose it depends on what agreement they come up with, but generally speaking, they will not have as much control over the creativity of what is produced. What's normally in these things sold is the right to make a TV show or a film based off of this content, not the right of veto over stuff. They may wish that, but that would be a harder sell. Okay, I think with that, let's just have a think about what we're going to do. I think we will do next week. Let's try and go back to that series of live streams that I tried to do that I couldn't come up with a short and exciting name for, but it's something like those characters within the Song of Ice and Fire who only appear a few times, but the impact of their appearance is much greater than the extent of their actual physical appearances in the books, if that kind of makes sense. So I think we've got quite a few interesting characters we can be going through on that. Look out on the main channel for normal content. Patrons, thank you so much. If you would like to support this channel, joining Patreon or supporting me on Patreon is the best way to do that still. Moderators, you are amazing. If you're watching this live, please show them a little bit of love on the way out. But that, I think, is all for this time. Take care, everyone. There will be appearing here-ish is going to be, if you're watching this back on YouTube later, there's going to be a link to other live streams appearing here. She's going to be linked to Patreon. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you again soon.